welcome to the Mariah Jean Fit YouTube channel. I'm Coach Mariah. Make sure you like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and share our videos as much as possible so we can reach a broader audience. We appreciate your support and enjoy the video. Hello and welcome. Notified by the Fit Minds podcast. Coach Mariah here. Today, let's talk about the sunk cost fallacy, a concept that was given to me by my virtual assistant. And I actually believe that this is an incredibly relevant topic to address when it comes to fitness, nutrition, even relationships, career, finances. And it is this illusion or assumption, self-fabricated, that we must continue to pursue a goal or endeavour, given the amount of time, effort, energy, money, or even emotion previously invested into literally anything we may choose to do. Now, if you just sit with that idea before we get into this podcast, it may be, I suppose, a turning point for you in your life, listening to what I've got to say about this topic. And it certainly changed mine when I understood what the sunk cost fallacy really looks like. So defined in the Oxford Dictionary, the phenomenon whereby a person is reluctant to abandon a strategy or course of action because they have invested heavily in it, even when it is clear that abandonment would be more beneficial. Okay, so the pursuit of doing something that even comes at a detriment to your future just because you don't want to give up on it. And just because you've invested lots of time and energy into it already. Do you believe that you may have fallen into the web of sunk cost fallacy? Okay, the spider that crawls through your life and holds you back. What does it look like in regards to real life examples? And why do we do it to ourselves? Watching the remainder of a movie, okay, is an example that you may have found boring or uninteresting simply because you've already watched half an hour of it. How many of us have done that? Started watching a movie and gone, this is crap. Why am I still watching? But yet you follow through to the end simply because you already started. Staying in a job or workplace that you have been in for the last 2, 3, 5, or even 10 years, simply because you've been there for so long. We've all been in that position in a job that we were unhappy in, and yet we stayed probably a lot longer than we should have. Pursuing the same career goals despite being unhappy with them because you believe that you only have one useful set of skills and you're not able to develop them further or to do the required education or even to upskill and develop or shift your mindset and skill set. So we've all met those people who say, well, you know what? I'm a tradie because that's all I've got. You know, I've invested all this time into being a builder or an electrician, or it could be anything. It could be a banker. It doesn't matter what career path you chose. But because you've invested such a long amount of time into that particular endeavour, you've convinced yourself that's all you're capable of. Continuing with a degree or qualification just because you've completed 1, 2, or 3 years of it, how many people have ended up graduating? And I saw this in my own high school year. So many people who went through with university degrees that they've never used, that they don't even want to use because they didn't enjoy it, but they just finished it. And they didn't think about whether or not they actually wanted to pursue a career path in that endeavour, but they kept going because they were so deep in. And obviously, you'd already have the study debt, okay, only to find out you don't enjoy studying the topic or even working in the field associated with the area of study. You know, how many people have studied medicine and ended up not liking it, you know, not being able to cut people open or not being particularly interested in medical topics, but they believed they had to become a doctor to be successful, you know? And there's this comparison and this definitely social hierarchy that almost forces us to go ahead with things that we just don't want to do, that we don't feel comfortable doing, that we're not happy doing. Staying in a relationship where you are continuously feeling unhappy, neglected, abused, or your boundaries are being compromised, you're being disrespected, etc. But because you have an emotional investment, the length of time invested, and some sort of a connection with the person, you believe that you should stay. You know, how many relationships have you been through, or maybe one very long relationship, I know I've done that, where you stayed because you've stayed. You know, you kept going because, gosh, may as well, been here for a few years now, may as well just put a few more in and hope for the best. Continuing to put tickets in the lottery because you have already been doing so for the last few years and you think you may have a better chance if you just keep going. Not saying that you shouldn't, put your tickets in the lottery, but the likelihood of winning the lottery is really low. The likelihood of you becoming a millionaire through your own successes is actually much higher. So continuing to do something, to waste money, to keep investing in something that is not giving back to you, just because of the amount of times you've already done it. Or even gambling on poker machines until you finally win. My gosh, I've been here for 3 hours, I may as well do another 5 hours until I win something big. When really, you may have lost more money than you've already won, okay? Simply by staying to play. So you may have put hundreds in, not kept track of it. This is why I don't touch gambling poker machines. There's no sort of bets I make. I don't believe that it's worth the risk involved. That's a personal standpoint. But we all know that gambling can lead to addiction, and certainly this idea that we feel like we have to keep going because we put so much into it already. You can see how dangerous this concept can be when we really think about how much it applies to your life. Continuing to invest money or time into a business or investment which has clearly not had much success or is running at a loss for a prolonged period of time. There are ups and downs in business. It does take a couple of years to get it off the ground, for sure, in startup businesses. But we're talking you've spent a whole decade pouring all of your energy and money into a business that just isn't going anywhere. And on that, you've invested so much time, so much energy and so much money into the business already that you feel as though there is nothing else. There is no other option. What else do you have? And you almost create that facade for yourself that is all you have. Continuing with a project, a hobby or endeavour simply because of the time, money or effort invested in such. See this recurring theme? Continuing with something that you are not enjoying, and it's definitely something that you feel shit about over and over and over again. It's giving you more grief than it is joy. There is not much to show for it after all those years. For example, it might look like continuing with a comp prep. This is going to be really controversial because I'm a comp prep coach. I try to get all my girls to stage. But you might be in a comp prep and you're not completely satisfied with it, but you've done 12 weeks, you've done 15 weeks, and you think, I may as well keep going. Maybe you got through the 15 weeks and thought, I actually need a bit more muscle. I need to grow. I'm not happy with the amount of muscle I have. There is no shame in pulling out and deciding, you know what, I'm going to invest more time into my growth season. Or maybe you've got a shitty relationship with food. Maybe you've, binged on certain food items and you've realized you need a little bit of work on that. There is no shame in ending a journey, but we then seem to continue with it despite the common warning signs to stop. So it might look like, continuing with a team sport that you no longer enjoy. And how many kids have you seen play tennis for 10, 15, 20 years? They come out the other end and they hate tennis, but they keep playing. But they hate tennis, but they keep playing. Renovating houses, despite how stressful it feels at the time and time again. I've seen people do this where they flip houses and, one day they wake up and realize they hate doing it. But they keep going because that's all they know how to do. Or that's all they think they know how to do. Traveling around the world to tick off locations off a bucket list. There's lots of people who do this, who travel and say, I've got a bucket list. I want to make sure I tick everything off. Despite a strong yearning for stability and maybe starting a family. That's really not going to align with constant travel. Maybe you can travel with your family for sure, but you may not meet somebody who's okay with that. So it's almost like you want to finish that endeavour because you started it. You want to make sure that you follow through, but you may not be enjoying it as much as you did in the beginning. Staying in your hometown. I've seen this really commonly because I'm from Bundaberg, and I see a lot of people who are from Bundaberg who are still in Bundaberg. And don't get me wrong, if you're happy where you are, awesome. But if you complain about being in your hometown and you're still there and you've had plenty of opportunities to leave, or certainly maybe you don't realise you have opportunities to leave, this is definitely the sunk cost fallacy. The amount of time you've spent living in that town, the invested friendships and connections, and you're afraid of moving away. You're afraid of meeting new people, and you've lived there for so long. You're afraid you won't find a job if you live elsewhere, and the list goes on, okay? So this is probably where my headspace was at when I was about 19, 20, when I did want to get out of Bundaberg. I knew that it just wasn't a place for me to be able to grow and to advance my career and certainly actually meet new people. That was one thing that I actually wanted to do, was meet new people and have new opportunities and new connections. And leaving actually was the best thing that I had done for myself, which then started a huge change in my life, for the better. So it could look like, in the case of nutrition and fitness, certainly because that's what we do, here at Fit Minds and Mariah Jean Fit, following a calorie deficit, just because you believe you have to continue to do so to maintain your results. So I can't tell you how many times I've seen people diet and continue dieting, even though they've reached their goal, and then they actually end up basically sabotaging everything. Their performance, they end up losing too much body fat, they get sick, they may have some atrophy as well, taking it to the extremes of thinking, well, I've got to keep eating this calorie deficit because if I don't, I'll gain weight. There's fear that because of all this dieting, that if you go back to maintenance calories, that something bad's going to happen. Eating certain food types because you believe you have to continue doing this to avoid gaining body fat. I've seen a lot of people who cut out bread, and just because their calories have been reduced, they all of a sudden then never reintroduce bread again. And they haven't really thought about the fact that maybe cutting out that food group just reduced their total calories. And so then it becomes this forever thing, this rule. I can't start eating bread again because I haven't been eating bread for 10 years. You're not going to explode because you've eaten bread, unless you're a celiac, or highly gluten intolerant. But even then, in small cases with gluten intolerance as well, it's just an intolerance. So it's kind of, maybe the amount of bread the person is eating, or the brand, or, whether or not it's wholemeal. Anyway, I talk about bread a lot, but this idea that you have to sustain what you're currently doing with any endeavour in your life just because you have been, and because the current set of circumstances, you're so afraid of them changing. Or even exercising excessive amounts daily because you believe that because you've reached that level of exercise, you somehow have to maintain it. So this is a great example. I see a lot of people who go for runs daily and they'll almost, increase the exercise output to think that that will get them better results. They'll run Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and they won't take any rest. And then all of a sudden they start, having some issues with cravings, and they're wasting muscle, but they're not seeing as much definition, and they feel like they're kind of going up and down, up and down, up and down all the time with their relationship with food, or their relationship with their exercise, or their self-body image. And they believe that they have to keep that level of exercise really high. They have to be in the gym for 4 hours. Because if they don't do that, something bad's going to happen. They're going to gain body fat, or they're going to lose their muscle. And it's not the case. Most of the time, the sunk cost fallacy gives us a false sense of security with what we perceive to be consistent factors in play, despite any actual apparent benefit. We haven't even really thought about whether it benefits us at all. We've just decided that that's it, It has to stay the way it is because it's comfortable and I know it well. And that's the thing. We convince ourselves of an illusion of comfort, stability, and predictability. If you can predict what your structure is going to look like already because you just do the same thing you've always done, you don't have to worry about anything. You don't have to think about anything. But that's the point. If we don't stop to think about some things in our life that may not be serving us anymore, even subscriptions you have to, could be Spotify, it could be Netflix, it could be Uber Eats on your phone. Oh, but I've had the app for ages, I may as well just keep it, you know? I have the Netflix subscription, I don't use it, may as well just keep paying it. I'll often audit my subscriptions to look at it and go, have I used that in the last couple of weeks or months? No, I can get rid of this. I don't need to keep a subscription or even a coaching service. If you currently have a coach, I actually see this a lot with my own clients. Some clients stay on even though they don't need coaching because they've invested years into coaching together. And don't get me wrong, it's interesting hearing this from a coach, right? You'd think a coach would want to hold on to a client forever. Sometimes I actually have to tell my clients, you don't need me anymore. It's okay, you can do this on your own. So this is what it's like. The sunk cost fallacy. Holding on to things that we probably need to let go of. And we kind of know that we need to let go of. Even if the uncomfortable position, right, that we get into is potentially not as beneficial as an alternative path, pursuit, or change in direction, we still seem to avoid it. For some reason, we avoid the change. And there is one single emotion that sums up the true root cause of beating a dead horse, so to speak. Fear. It's all fear-based. You're afraid. Now, I've been there. I've been afraid. I was afraid to leave a violent relationship. I was afraid to leave a job where I was being overworked and underpaid. I was afraid of leaving my hometown. I was afraid of quitting smoking. I was afraid of letting go of my eating disorder. I was afraid of letting myself gain weight. I was afraid of any sort of change outside of my comfort zone because of the amount of time I'd spent there, thinking that I had to stay there. Because of all the invested energy into that particular pursuit or endeavour or way of living even, way of functioning, I didn't give myself an opportunity at those points in time to realise I had an opportunity to do more or to change or to do different, yeah? We're afraid of the alternative, okay? We're afraid of the change. We're afraid of the thing that looks different because it's foreign. We haven't experienced it before, or certainly we want to fall back on the comfort of what we've always had, exactly the way we've always had it. Or done it, you know, exactly the same way we've always done it. I hear that all the time from some clients. Oh, but I've always done this. Oh, but I usually do this. Oh, but so-and-so said, you should always do this. It's an interesting concept because there should be no rule of thumb that you need to continue doing something, you know, just because you've always done it. There are different methods, and if you're not getting the results that you want, if you're not achieving what you actually want in life, why are you still doing it? You need to ask yourself those questions. We also hold fear around the idea of losing what we worked hard for instead of the benefit of gaining a new alternate opportunity. You know, if you're running 10Ks a day, you're scared of losing your cardio fitness, right? You're scared of losing your conditioning. You think if you just stop running, you're not going to be lean anymore. And these, as I said, are all self-fabricated concepts. We've created these internally. Nobody's actually told us that these are facts, we'll say, because they're not facts. But even if they have, even if a professional, someone who believed to be a professional has said, don't stop running, you'll get fat, you know, you still have to take everything that everybody says with a grain of salt, unless they have, you know, almost like, and this is what qualifications are for, to back themselves. You know, this is why people study and get qualifications. This is why I'm currently doing a postgrad at the moment in performance nutrition. I want to better myself as an educator and as a coach, and I want to make sure that the content and information I'm giving you is as factual as possible. And if it changes, I'm able to notify my clients. But you've got to consider, if somebody has encouraged this idea that you cannot change or that you have to stay the same as you always have, you must consider whether they're actually right or whether it's the person in your life that needs to change. Whether it's that person that you probably don't need around anymore. And that's a hard one as well, you know. If someone's convinced you that you've invested 4, 5, 6 years in something you're not enjoying doing, like a family member saying, may as well finish your studies. If someone's trying to convince you to keep going with something that you have communicated that you are not happy with, you must ask yourself, are they telling you to do this from their selfish position of where they want you to be in life or what they want for you and your happiness. So, why is this detrimental for our future goals and aspirations? Why is entertaining the sunk cost fallacy damaging for what you really want? You know? When met with a failing project, endeavour or venture, it can be fairly confronting for human beings, being rather critical of themselves. Yeah? How many times have you not done well with something that you have put so much time and effort into and you felt like a failure? And as a result, you've pushed yourself even harder than ever to better yourself or to win in that situation, when sometimes it's probably better for you to cut your losses. Those who seem to fall victim to the sunken cost fallacy will generally have trouble understanding the concept of letting go and detaching themselves from the heavy emotions surrounding the process of change. The major issue with this concept is a cyclic tendency that generally pairs with the process, okay? So you're just going around in circles. And this is much like other concepts I've played with in podcasts, is that often this is just repetitious effort of the same types of processes and thinking where we don't change, where we don't make any sort of meaningful change. In that, the invested time, money or effort cannot be saved or recovered, okay? So that's how we end up in that cycle. Is, well, I can't get my money back, can't get my time back, can't get my years back, so therefore I'll just put more in. It doesn't make a lot of sense when you say it like that, does it? However, the concept of investing even more time, effort, money may be entertained in order to justify the loss. You know, if we entertain that idea, we can then consider that maybe the loss isn't quite a loss yet. You know, if you continue to pour money and time into something, eventually it'll pay off, right? Right? You'd think so, but it's not always the case, especially if it's proved otherwise up until now. And then, following that process, the cycle repeats. This can often leave a person or a business in a position where they are unable to cut their losses and potentially lead to their own demise. Okay? Leading a ship towards an iceberg simply because that was the chosen path, and deviating is not an option. And we also, in that same breath, must pay attention to pride. Is it our pride stopping us from quitting? Where we believe that quitting, giving up is a failure in itself. And perhaps sometimes still going, continuing, beating that dead horse is probably more of a failure because you're not able to identify the risk involved in continuing the endeavour. This can then see us sell ourselves short of the potential life, career, and relationships and opportunities that we may be holding ourselves back from. It's crazy, right? You may actually be holding yourself back simply by not changing paths, not handing in your resignation. Oh, I can't because I get good hours and, oh, my boss understands I've got kids. It's like, you know what? You've got no flippin' clue whether or not if you change jobs, you might have a better experience even, and the person who has employed you may be just as understanding, if not more, of your situation. How do you know if you don't allow it to happen? Simply because of the guilt, right, that we hold in relation to the lost investment. It's all about guilt and fear. It can also put us in a position where we become bitter. I've done this before, and probably more recently. I tend to do this with some people, some clients as well, where I'm bitter about the fact that they just don't want to listen and they don't want to take any advice and they want to go on their own path that's probably going to work against their goals. And then wasting further energy on them. Perhaps it's people, connections, projects that may simply be a lost cause. I'm really bad for this. I don't give up on people. I'm really shit at giving up on people. But sometimes you've got to do it to protect yourself, to protect your own energy. And you've got to identify when you're probably pouring so much energy into a bottomless cup, which can leave us feeling drained and leave us in a perpetual state of repetition and frustration in that more effort simply doesn't pay off. And the idea of shifting away from the goal, relationship, connection, or venture isn't an option either. So you can see how this just almost like amplifies the experience of frustration that you're getting from whatever it is in your life. And there's always going to be one thing that you have in your life that you're just putting too much into and probably not getting the return that you expected. So how do we become more strategic about making changes, cutting losses and ending or starting a new endeavour? What do we do? How do we change this? How do we better allocate our resources and see our time and effort as just that, a resource that we can use for our benefit, especially when redesignated or assigned to the right causes? Our time and energy is finite, and therefore we must really believe so, for the purpose of valuing our contributions to our future goals and aspirations. If you do not value yourself, your time, your resources, you therefore will give them away, and you will feel emptier than ever. In the deciding where our energy, time, and money goes, it must be something that we assess and monitor frequently. I'm talking on a daily and weekly basis, thinking about what you are doing and whether it is getting you to where you want to be. And we must place a high value on assets, resources, and strategy, in that everything we do in life, if it does not serve some sort of purpose, and I know this sounds almost a little selfish, but really you think about it, you're not alive to live for other people. So if you want to think about yourself, this is probably the way to do it. If it doesn't serve some sort of purpose, not even a benefit, but if it's not feeling good for you and it just feels like shit constantly, you're the only person losing out. And it's purposeful, because there are some things we don't have choices on in life, but the things we do have choices on, if they are providing lots of misery, we must ask what our effort is and what our part is to play in that, because that's the only part we have any control over. If it doesn't deliver some sort of satisfaction or happiness over a long period of time, I'm talking over a long period of time, there's always going to be ups and downs. Relationships, career, everything has ups and downs. This is normal. But if it feels like a constant downer, we've got a problem. We've got to address it. If it doesn't have any of those factors, it may not necessarily be worth what we continue to invest and the weight that we give it, the pedestal that we've placed this particular experience, relationship, career on in our lives. It may not actually be as worthy as we would think. In essence, we must learn to value ourselves, and that's what it's about. It's valuing your own time, your money, and your energy. Amongst other things, we have many resources in life, our education, our knowledge, and practice frequently assessing where this is delegated, right? So where you delegate time, effort, money, and obviously if you're delegating, you're giving it to that particular thing. So you're saying, you know what, I'm going to invest in this so that my money's going to go here, okay? My time's going to go here. That's self-delegation. Directly in relation to ROI. So this is very business terminology, but basically the return of investment, are you pouring into an empty cup or a bottomless cup? Much of the process of valuing ourselves comes down to practicing confidence in our decision-making processes as well as self-confidence. So we actually have to be confident in what we're choosing to do. It can't just be about being confident in who you are. You've also got to be confident in the choices that you're making. You can't constantly be unsure of every next step that you make. There's going to be risk involved in everything, and sometimes we don't think about the fact that there is risk involved in staying where we are. Crazy, right? We don't think about that. We only think about risk involved in change, but we don't think about risk involved in not changing. That's how people end up sick. That's how people end up unwell, unfit with health issues, is because they don't often think about the risk of remaining complacent. So obviously we want to look at, really evaluating the bigger picture instead of running from or avoiding having to make any decisions at all. And taking a reality check on our lives. Are there multiple components we wish were different? What have we proactively done? So what have you proactively done to help change that? What have you done to perhaps repeat the same mistakes? A lot of it is taking responsibility. I stayed in a relationship for 7 on and off years that wasn't right for me. And that was 100% a decision on my behalf. Multiple decisions, very difficult decisions, but very much I had a part to play. You know, can't always just sit in that victim role. This is potentially going to stir a lot of people up. You know, this podcast is probably going to grind a few people, and it's okay. I never give trigger warnings in my podcast because I think if you're listening to this podcast, you obviously want to change your life. You're obviously wanting to be confronted. And if not, you can switch it off whenever you like. You know, you don't have to listen to this stuff. But I find that it is life-changing. And when we do this, right, when we repeat these mistakes, it's in hopes that the lost time and effort will magically grant or automatically earn us the reward we've been yearning for so long. Just because you put 10 years of effort into something doesn't mean the person owes you anything. In fact, they can choose to walk away whenever they want, and they can choose to treat you however they want to. And that is heartbreaking. But you are not owed anything because of the time you put into something. Never, unless it's a contractual agreement based on time. So this is potentially a podcast that may change your life. There may be many things in your life, or maybe a couple of things, factors, components, you know, the semantics, the dynamic, currently that you're simply just settling for. Even if you have this niggling urge to change, shift, end something, or even start something new with something that you're just not happy with in your life. But that's the idea. This concept was strongly used by an influencer, famous PT, mentor, whatever you want to call him. He probably doesn't like being called an influencer. James Smith, if you ever know of this guy, he's awesome. If you don't, look him up. He talks about this topic frequently. I went and saw him live myself, and it was really confronting to hear about this topic because it made me question a couple of things in my life that I probably had stayed pretty stagnant with due to invested time. But I actioned it, I changed it. It involved moving to the Sunshine Coast away from Brisbane because that was my dream location. I was just holding myself back. So he brings it up frequently enough to stir up plenty of controversy in the lives of those who've simply found themselves comfortable in misery. And that's what it is. The sunk cost fallacy is often finding yourself comfortable in misery. It's finding yourself not willing to change because of the fear, but also being afraid of staying where you are and only entertaining the idea of staying because of the time that you have given to that endeavour, that relationship, that career, that job that you just won't leave even though you fucking hate it because you're afraid. And that's it. Fear and the time you've already invested into it. Believing that you're owed something, but never actually getting it. If we learn to challenge our thoughts and also assumptions, we also learn to challenge the cage we have built around ourselves and our limited or potentially limitless expectations of our life. And see that? The cage is literally ours to build or deconstruct, to mold or demolish around yourself. You can be free or you can be contained. And much of it is our own thoughts. You may have heard the concept life by design, and much of this is aligned with the idea that you have decisions daily that you could make towards a life that you want for yourself. It must be understood that in the same breath, again, we have decisions we can make to walk away from things that are no longer for us. It's a very strong concept, but it works. Whether it be a toxic relationship or friendship you're stuck in, but you can't let go of. And the thing is, you can. You're just using the words can't. A shitty job where you're undervalued, bullied, or overworked continuously. A sport that you no longer enjoy. Running 10 kilometers a day, even though you feel exhausted constantly. You can let go. Or perhaps you might be only eating clean foods, even though you're not exactly sure why. it might be handy to discuss your options and thoughts with someone that you trust, your psychologist, your best friend, or even a family member. It's important to choose somebody that has been supportive in the past and who you know has been able to provide a very neutral insight without any sort of strong bias towards what they personally want for you. So someone that you know is reliable in that aspect. Someone who you know who's been able to talk to you without judgment and give advice without any sort of assumption made about your life and your decisions. Somebody who's able to give you an outsider's perspective that is both soft but kind and realistic. Someone you know who can help to get you outside of your own head and reassess the situation. And often someone who can help you to step back and see the rut you've had yourself stuck in for far too long. And in that same concept as well, this also looks like maybe if you've had your friends saying the same thing over and over again about that relationship, that career, or that life change, maybe it's time to listen. Maybe they have a point. And this is the only time I would really encourage listening to people around you, is when you are repeatedly unhappy in that endeavour and you're looking for a way out. So much of the process of eliminating a mindset driven by the sunk cost fallacy involves weighing up risk versus reward for polar opposite pathways. It's kind of like that Jekyll and Hyde. You have to have these opposing sides. You have to do a direct comparison. It's the only way. In that you will entertain the idea of, what if? What if I did move away? What if I did leave this relationship? What would it look like? And not just the bad parts, both parts, the good and the bad, the benefits, the risks, everything involved, the things that you could look forward to, the things that might be difficult. Most importantly, what if there is another way or a better option to pursue than the one that just hasn't been working for so long? This doesn't necessarily mean leaving your relationship tomorrow. For those who are getting really excited and they want to go home and break up with their boyfriend, no. Okay, I'm not saying that. You don't let go of good connections in life just because there are some ups and downs. Not just for the sake of it or because you had a disagreement. Rest assured, Coach Mariah is not saying end to relationship. But if you're listening to this and you're in a situation, whether it's male or female, and your partner is violent, they're abusive, all of the above, where it is just constant and you are afraid and you are no longer happy and you haven't been for years, you must question why you're still there. And if it is because of the time invested, you have your answer. You don't have to discontinue your current exercise regime because you're not seeing instant results. This is not a reason to stop going to the gym, okay? But maybe it might look like, maybe the current method I'm using with my nutrition and my fitness isn't working, and maybe I need to reassess that. It doesn't look like quitting your job because you had a bad day. Okay, this is not drastic decisions in life. That is not, it's not having a midlife crisis at 20. It's not even having a midlife crisis. But it is definitely looking at how much of your life is causing you grief and how much is causing you joy. It looks like auditing your life, looking at all of the facets, all right? Every factor in play, every type of moving part, anything that you've continuously suffered or struggled with despite not really consciously wanting to make any sort of significant change around these circumstances. There is no point in complaining, and you'll probably find people will get the shits with you if you do it. I was one of those people, over and over about the same thing or the same person, when you can very obviously see what the problem might be. It might be your position in their life. It might be the fact you're still at that job. It might be because you've limited yourself. The sunk cost fallacy, the concept that you have given so much and therefore you have to stay. Even if it's painful, I look back on some things, I think, why did I stay? It looks like determining how much of your current suffering is decided by your continuous invested effort in the endeavours, which are just simply no longer worth it. Okay? It's a lot of responsibility for your own thoughts and actions, isn't it? And most people find that really uncomfortable. Probably why many people are still in shit situations and shit relationships, because they didn't hold themselves accountable for their decisions and their part to play. Because they were busy sitting there as a victim. I've spoken to a lot of people who have health conditions, high cholesterol, thyroid problems, the list goes on. But there's no sort of conscious desire to change because they like being where they are, because it's comfortable, even though it's uncomfortable in probably worse ways. They like being where they are because they're so afraid of the change, and they don't know a life without this, illness to fall back on, or this crutch. And it's a big thing to say, but been there myself too. Been there with anorexia, been there with bulimia. It was very difficult to let go of my eating disorders, not because I wanted attention, but because they were a place of comfort. And I didn't know anything else for such a long time, and I was afraid of life without it. And the time that I'd invested into not eating enough food and being as skinny as possible, I was afraid I would lose that. And that anything that wasn't that wasn't good enough. So, in order to entertain the idea of growth and change, you've got to be okay with being uncomfortable for a short period of time at least. And I can assure you it's probably a lot better than being as uncomfortable as you currently are in this sustained shitty situation that you're in. It looks like entertaining a realistic and optimistic view instead of a pessimistic one, especially for the alternate opportunity from where you currently are. So instead of thinking, I've heard this before, I really love food, I couldn't diet. And it's like, you don't even understand what dieting looks like. Not sustainably anyway, or not for the purpose of actually including foods you enjoy, because you've only ever sought out answers that look like starving yourself and excluding food groups instead of seeking support from someone who knows better. So entertaining the optimistic view instead of the pessimistic one could actually see that you might actually have a great time with dieting, because it's not about excluding all these food groups. It's actually just about reducing your total calories. So, remaining where you are with anything in life isn't a sustainable cure for continuous dissatisfaction either, okay? There is no sort of staying where you are to continually be disappointed in yourself. That is a solution. And that isn't a solution. That's just, that's inaction. You're just sitting there stagnant, doing nothing, not moving out of fear. In fact, it's likely feeding back into your state of disappointment. So the weird thing is, it's almost like a form of self-sabotage. And I've done a podcast on self-sabotage. But the sunk cost fallacy feeds into, this is shit, I don't know anything else, so I'm just going to continue to feel like shit with this thing because I've been here for so long. It almost feels normal now. Eventually, new processes and new skills or relationships, okay, of course they're daunting in the beginning. New careers, new jobs, new boyfriend. It's scary as shit because you don't know what they're like. But eventually, this becomes the new normal and second nature, just like the last experience did. And you've got to stop to ask yourself, and I really like this concept because I probably use it a lot myself, and I even use it with my friends, my clients. What's the worst thing that can happen? Okay, what's the worst thing that can happen? Because you're obviously filling your mind with that. Now, what's the best thing that can happen? What's the best thing that can happen? In fact, are there numerous things that can be the best thing that could happen in that given scenario? Sometimes, this can be the simplest way of taking a non-emotional standpoint of the perception of the risk versus reward. Weigh up the pros and cons of changing direction, letting go, and even moving on. Write them down or discuss them with a friend. Journal about them if you need to document it. Reflect as many times as you need to. How many times have you made a choice to change your career, your job, end a relationship, move towns, reduce your stress levels, buy or sell your own home, and thought, Thank fuck I did that. I don't know why I didn't do that sooner. You are only one decision away from a completely different life. You never know what that may feel like until you give yourself the opportunity to do so, despite the fear. As they say, feel the fear and do it anyway. That's it from me, guys. A little bit of a shorter vlog today. This one definitely came from the heart. Looking forward to doing another one for you soon. Make sure you subscribe to our channels and like, share, and even rate our podcast if you can. It helps to get the word out there. Thanks a lot. Bye.